You may have heard that ancient Rome wasn't exactly known for its pleasant street smells. If you've seen the movie Gladiator, you might recall the scene where Russell Crowe's character is gifted roses to cover his body odor. And yeah, that was totally necessary. In fact, according to history, ancient Rome stank to high heaven. Between the waste in the streets, the sewage in the public bathrooms, and the lack of basic hygiene, it's no wonder that people had to cover their noses just to walk down the street. So how did they do it? Well, today we take a deep dive into the history of perfume and find out how ancient Romans masked their city's worst smells. It's me. Welcome to my channel, where we bring you new videos every week on all aspects of history. Ancient Rome was not just smelly, it was odoriferous. The Roman Empire stretched from Britain to Egypt, and along the way, it encountered lots of different stinks. There were, of course, the smells of the farmyards, the animals, and the fields. But there were also smells unique to the ancient world, like the scent of burning oil lamps or stale urine, which they used to clean things. All these smells combined to make an aroma all their own. And while we think of Rome as having been this incredible empire, remember that they had the same problems as any large city today. Their garbage piled up in the streets, and their plumbing overflowed in the public squares. It was a literal breeding ground for disease and stench. But while the rest of Europe was hiding their nose at the thought of going to Rome, the Romans themselves were finding ways to block out the stink. One of the easiest ways to mask bad smells was with flowers. We don't really associate flowers with smelling good now, but back then people would carry around bouquets of flowers to cover their personal smells when they headed out in public. You know, if you want to get rid of one bad smell with another, it makes sense to use something that smells really pungent and strong. And what smells more pungent and strong than a bouquet of poo? Well, okay, maybe don't get those, but other flowers were fair game. Laurel, for instance, was used by both men and women, and it was so popular that wreaths made out of it were actually used as prizes for Olympic champions. Laurel was also associated with the god Apollo, so it probably had some religious connotations as well. Another flower used by the elite was the flower called cassia. This was a very expensive import from the East, so much so that you could even pay your taxes with it. And because of its cost, it was often mixed with other flowers to stretch the supply. The most popular of these combinations was with rose, creating a sweet, woody scent that would last a long time. Roses were popular among women, and many emperors' wives were given the nickname Rose. The most famous rose of all, though, was the emperor's wife, Julia Misa, who was nicknamed the Rose of the World. She was married to Elagabalus, and he practically put her on a pedestal, calling her the sweetest flower in the garden of the world. And that was really saying something, since she was the one who gave him the nickname. The elite weren't the only ones carrying around flowers, though. In fact, you could hire children to do it for you. Sometimes they would carry around a cone made out of linen or papyrus that was stuffed with fragrant flowers. They would then hold that cone under your nose as they walked behind you, effectively creating a moving bouquet. But you didn't always need a live bouquet. Dried flowers could be used as well. For instance, the Romans would take dried rose petals and stuff them into the folds of their toga. This way, they could avoid the unpleasant smells of the streets and also show off their wealth at the same time. After all, not everyone could afford imported flowers. While flowers were great, there was a problem. They only smelled good for so long. Most flowers would start to wilt within a couple days, meaning that you would have to replace them often. That's why many wealthy Romans turned to another option: perfumes. Perfumes were made by mixing alcohol with flowers and spices, and they were a quick way to mask the bad smells. While the elite could afford to buy perfumes made in Greece or Egypt, most of the perfumes used in Rome were made locally. There were hundreds of shops across the city making perfumes out of whatever ingredients they had on hand. Some perfumes had a reputation for being better than others, like those made by a woman named Billis. According to Pliny the Elder, she created a perfume called liquefacta, which was so exquisite that the Emperor Nero bought up all the supplies of it. He loved the scent so much that he even went to visit her house to try to figure out how she made it, but she wouldn't tell him. But regardless of who made it, perfumes were quickly becoming the way to go in Rome. Not only did they smell good, they were small and easy to carry around. Plus, with a little bit of practice, you could figure out how to make your own scents without having to rely on imports. Of course, there were still some bad smells that couldn't be overcome by simply buying flowers or making perfume. Public latrines were the worst offenders here. In the public latrines, the urine was often used to clean things, and you can imagine how that made the bathroom smell. But there was nothing to be done about it, except maybe cover your nose while you used the bathroom. But the problem became less of an issue when Emperor Nero decided to build public bathrooms in every neighborhood. These bathrooms were modeled after the ones in taverns and brothels, which means that they were separated by thin walls instead of stalls. So yes, you could cover your nose, but chances are somebody else was doing the same thing next to you and you would just end up mixing smells. Luckily, Nero's bathrooms also came equipped with a flushing system, so at least the toilets didn't pile up. Speaking of cleaning, urine wasn't just used in the public restrooms. People used it all over the house. In fact, urine was used for everything from washing clothes to cleaning teeth, and it was even used to make perfume. There was even a specific type of jug for this purpose, and it was called a pisco. Urine was considered a solvent, so it was used to break down dirt and grime. In fact, urine was used for so many things that every household in Rome had their own latrine, so they could save money on having to go to public ones. But of course, this led to the streets piling up with human waste, which meant that the citizens needed to find a way to deal with the smells. One way to help mitigate the smells of the streets was to cover the waste with ashes. Ashes were cheap and readily available, so it was a common practice to throw a couple handfuls over the piles. The main downside was that they made a mess, too. Imagine walking through the streets and getting covered in ash from head to toe. Not fun. Not everybody could afford ashes, though, so others found different ways to cope with the smells. Instead of covering the waste with ashes, some people would burn things. This would get rid of the smell pretty fast, but it was dangerous. There were many fires in Rome, and many historians believe that the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD was started by burning garbage. But hey, sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do to get rid of that nasty, nasty stink. So what can we learn from all this? Well, people in ancient Rome had the same problems with smells as we do today. They tried different methods to get rid of them, and some worked better than others. But they also learned to adapt to the smells, just like we do today. We might complain about the smell of garbage, but if we had to walk through streets covered in human and animal waste, we'd probably shut up pretty quick. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe for more content. Thank you to all our supporters who helped us make this video, and thanks to all of you for watching.